Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Spencer here. You're one of the creators of Zillow, really transformed the real estate market and the accessibility of understanding the real estate market. Hotwire with travel, which you really helped lead a lot at Expedia with that, and you've taken a couple of different companies public through special purpose vehicles and been on the boards of various companies like TripAdvisor and Palantir. So just a plethora of experience in the business and technology space. So excited to have you here, Spencer, and to get into your story.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, early on, you were growing up. What inspired you to get into entrepreneurship and business leadership? Like, when did that begin?
I've always been interested in entrepreneurship. I was the kid that was like baking cookies and selling them to my parents' friends and tracing. I remember doing tracings like of art and making my parents' friends buy those as well. So I guess I was always interested in business from an early age. But through college, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be a journalist actually in high school and college, and spent a lot of time in journalism and in media. Did internships at Bloomberg News, at NBC News, at Fox Broadcasting. So I was interested in media and journalism until I did a couple summers in investment banking, and that opened my eyes to Wall Street, and that was my path to entrepreneurship.
Mhm. And so you spent some time at TPG, at Goldman Sachs, and just various different kind of investment focused roles. Like, what did you like kind of see some of these like internet trends happening and want to jump into that and build a company? Like, how did you kind of get interested in the internet early on?
Well, in 1999, I had left investment banking and was in San Francisco at a private equity firm. And 1999 in San Francisco, the closest thing I can describe to it is sort of like today's excitement around AI, or even maybe even like 2 years ago's excitement around blockchain and crypto, where everyone was just like going nuts. And in 1999, everyone was going nuts about this kind of newish thing called the internet. And the internet had been around for about 5 years in a consumer form, but companies were just really starting to take off. And I was at a private equity firm that was buying and selling traditional businesses, some tech companies, but mostly traditional businesses. But I wanted to be involved in something more operational, something that was closer to the consumer, closer to the customer. I wanted to be in an environment where I was rolling up my sleeves and sort of in the trenches with people building things. Many other people that left private equity or investment banking back then to go into tech were motivated by the riches of kind of there's gold in them hills in that first era of .com. I actually wasn't motivated by that. I was more motivated by doing something that felt more innovative and less traditional and less stodgy, which I found private equity and Wall Street to be.
Where did this idea for like Hotwire come from? Like, how did that get
Well,
started?
Hotwire was incubated inside of TPG, so it was not my idea specifically at all. TPG by the late '90s had bought, let's see, they bought Continental Airlines out of bankruptcy in the mid '90s, America West Airlines out of bankruptcy, and by the time I got there, they had sold part of their Continental stake to Northwest Airlines. So they basically controlled three U.S. airlines and then Ryanair, which was the biggest carrier in Europe, sort of the Southwest Airlines of Europe. And so the idea was hatched by David Bonderman, who was the founder and longtime head of TPG, to try to create an airline consortium company. So to go to 6 airlines and try to get them all together to create an online discount travel website. And I was staffed on this idea as a 23-year-old associate with a gentleman named Carl Peterson, who was a couple years older than me at the time. I guess still is a couple years older than me. And so we spent about 6 months working with these 6 airlines and writing the business plan, creating the company's incorporation documents, and trying to figure out what we were going to go build. And then Carl and I asked TPG if we could go and build it, if we could leave TPG and help create the company, rather than what the original plan was just to get it started and then to hire a team. And instead, Carl and I said, hey, we should just be the beginnings of that team.
So how did you go and like get users for it? I mean, you had some financing probably from them. So how did you kind of get customers?
It was hard. I mean, this user acquisition is still the hardest nut to crack in consumer internet. Back then in 1999, you could rely on PR quite a bit, and we did. We leveraged those 6 airlines to get a lot of news media. We did a lot of co-marketing with the airlines, where the airlines were promoting it to their own customers. We'll obviously talk about Zillow in a moment, but Zillow also followed that PR playbook when it launched in 2006. If you were starting a company today, it's very difficult to use PR for that purpose. Today, it's all about hacking social media and trying to
Mm.
find ways for your new service to go viral inside of TikTok or Instagram or other social networks. But back then, it was mostly PR, and then sadly, also paid user acquisition through Google search. I say sadly because, I'd like to believe, every founder would like to believe that their product is so inherently amazing that it just grows on its own. But unfortunately, that very rarely happens. In the case of Hotwire, we certainly relied on paid user marketing, mostly through Google search. Zillow was a little bit more organic than that, but we could talk about that in a moment.
So it was only like a couple years after that you guys got acquired, I think, for 685 million. Like, how did that kind of go about? Were you approached for by Interactive Corp? Like, how did
Um,
that happen?
Yeah, so we started Hotwire in 1999, and things were going very well for those first 2 years up till 2001. And then September 11th, 2001 happened, and it was terrible for the company. Firstly, people were stranded. Airlines didn't fly
Yeah.
for I think it was 10 or 11 days. We had tens of thousands of customers around the world that were stranded. Um, and then, of course, people were very reluctant to travel for 6 or more months for safety reasons. And so, what we did well at Hotwire during that period after 9/11, 2001, was pivot the company to hotels
Mm,
rather than airline tickets. And
smart.
consumers were still anxious to travel, but they were interested in staying close to home and traveling domestically. So we downsized the company. We did a down round where we raised venture capital at a lower price than the prior round. We pivoted the product focus and brand focus towards hotels and rental cars and did a lot of other things to save the company. And by 2 years later, 2003, we were on a path to go public, and we had retained Goldman Sachs to take us public. And then we got an inbound call from Expedia and IAC that said, "Hey, how about M&A instead?" And we decided to go that route.
Huh. Interesting. So, like, after that, I mean, it seemed like it was pretty quick that you kind of launched Zillow and launched the next thing. Like, so you
Yeah,
just
I mean, I moved up to Seattle after the acquisition of Expedia. The acquisition by Expedia. Hotwire was based in San Francisco. Expedia was based in Seattle. So I moved to Seattle and I ran the hotel business for Expedia Group, which by that point was Expedia, Hotwire, Hotels.com, and a couple other brands. And I was doing that for about, I think maybe a year, maybe a year and a half. And I got the entrepreneurial itch again, wanted to do something more startup focused and work at a smaller company. And so I joined up with two other former Expedia execs and decided to try it again. And actually, sorry, three other Expedia execs. And we tried to start it again. And that's how Zillow was born in 2005, 2006.
where did the idea come from, Spencer? Like, how did you kind of figure it out?
The idea for Zillow came from our own needs. I mean, several of us were shopping for a home at the time, and we were building mashups of Google Maps, King County data. King County is the county that Seattle is in, and actually, even back then, King County had a pretty good website with lots of good data about public record data about homes. And also MLS data, which we had gained access to. Like we had a friend who was a real estate agent who let us look at some MLS data, and we realized that if this was really useful for us who were buying homes, this would probably be useful for other people. But the moment of innovation and inspiration at Zillow was the realization that if we were to build a consumer real estate service in 2005, more than 10 years into the history of the internet, it had to have some unique differentiation. It couldn't just be listings of homes for sale. And so instead at Zillow, we decided to focus not on what was for sale, but what people's houses were worth. And so that inspiration, that idea of trying to put a price on every rooftop, a value for every home, a zestimate for every home, was how we started the company. And when we launched in 2006, it immediately went viral. We had 40 million estimates on homes, which is about half the country. And we had 1 million visitors in the first day. I think we had 4 million visitors in the first month. And so it wasn't until about 2 years later that we added listings of homes for sale. So, people forget about this or they don't know this part of the story. People think of Zillow as a great website to shop for a home. And of course it is today. But for the first 2 years, it was just a great website to see what people's houses were worth. It was mostly voyeuristic and fun, but not all that useful for shopping for a home. But it was that voyeuristic feature of showing people what their house was worth that drove so much traffic early on.
How did you get standing for the Zillow estimates you guys are doing on people's homes? Like, was it just you kind of estimate, you look at the area, try to figure out the right price, but how did that get credibility within the real estate community?
Um, it took a long time to get credibility in the real estate community. In some ways, it's still getting credibility in the real estate community. Firstly, though, it's become so much more accurate over the 15 years since we launched. So when we launched in 2006, we had 40 million estimates with about if I remember correctly, about a 11 or 12% error rate, which means every time the house sold, the Zestimate the day before was about 10, 11, 12% off on average. Fast forward to today, Zillow has something like 100 million Zestimates, so basically every home in the country, not about half the homes in the country, and the accuracy is in the 2 or 3%, or I should say the error rate is 2 or 3%, meaning that when a home sells, on average, it's, the Zestimate is typically spot on. Or within a couple points. So it's gotten so much more accurate, mostly because of AI improvements over the last 15 years and computer vision improvements. In terms of gaining accuracy gaining credibility in the industry, there are still agents that rail against Zillow and rail against the inaccuracy of Zestimates, but most real estate agents have come around to recognizing that it's a Zestimate. It's not as appraisal, it's a swag. It's a computer model's best guess. And then they go and explain to consumers why they have the local expertise to be even more accurate when determining a home's value.
How did you manage being in so many different positions at Zillow? I mean, you were COO, CFO, VP of marketing, CEO. I mean, you basically tried everything.
I did. I did have most like at most startups. I mean, founders have most jobs at most startups, for the first couple of years. So when we first started the company, I ran marketing, and I think that was for this first year or so. And then once we got on a path of having raised the Series A, I think it was the Series A, if I remember correctly, I became CEO and my co-founder became chairman. It's really useful though at a startup to wear lots of hats. I mean, that's what startup life is all about. That's what makes it fun and interesting. One day you're head of sales, one day you're head of marketing, every day you're head of finance because you're, as a founder, you're the one running QuickBooks and keeping Excel spreadsheets and paying bills through online bill pay. And that's startup life. And it was very valuable and useful for me as the company scaled to have played lots of roles. And it's something actually that I counsel. I mean, even at a more mature company, I always suggest when one of your direct reports leaves or quits or gets pushed out or whatever, I think it's really valuable for a manager to do that person's role for 3 or 6 months before backfilling. Like it helps the manager really understand what is needed in that role, and especially at a scaling company, that might be different as the company scales. So it's very useful for people to get in the weeds and understand what's actually happening at their company.
Yeah. Spencer, when you were building Zillow, you led it to like over I think 4,500 employees, 3 billion in revenue. Were there like specific management techniques that you used to scale this, to that size? Like were there things you kind of implemented that really helped scale to that point?
I think that the biggest challenge when scaling, and this is true whether you're going from 5 employees to 25 employees or 25 to 250 or 250 to 2,500. But the biggest challenge with scaling is being very intentional about your schedule and your responsibilities and also your team around you. So I'll be specific. If you think about everyone that comes to work today at your company, the reason they're coming to work is because they had that job a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago. But the challenges that the company faces for the road ahead over the next 3 months or the next 6 months might be very different. And therefore, in fact, at a scaling company, they are very different than the challenges that you had in the prior 3, 6, or 12 months. And so the types of people and the skill sets required are very different. For example, a great software engineer that gets hired early on when the company has 5 employees, all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, you could wake up 6 months later and that person is managing 10 people or 20 people. And that may not be the right role for them. They may not be motivated by that, and they might not even be a very good manager. Perhaps they were a great software engineer, but not a great manager. And so you have to be very intentional, kind of constantly looking at the org chart, constantly thinking about what are people's strengths and weaknesses, what is needed in a particular role at a particular point in time. Otherwise, if you just are kind of on autopilot, you end up with the wrong people in the wrong positions at the different points in time in a company's life. And at a stable company, it's not that big a deal because things don't change that quickly. But at a scaling company, it can change pretty quickly. And so you have to be very thoughtful about that.
So you did like 15 different acquisitions when you were at Zillow. Like, how do you determine what's a great acquisition, and then like when's an ideal time also to close it?
Yeah, we were very acquisitive at Zillow, and I'm proud of our acquisition track record. Most acquisitions go badly, and I think as you say, I think we did 16 or 17 total acquisitions when I was CEO, and I think we had an excellent track record. They weren't all, it wasn't 100% success rate. It never is. I think in M&A, you'd be lucky if if you have, it's sort of like baseball. It's like if you have a 30% or better success rate, that's pretty good at hitting, and that's pretty good in M&A. And I think ours at Zillow was probably 70 or 80%. In terms of what makes for a good acquisition, firstly, founder retention and founder fit when buying a startup is really important. So the ones that worked best were the ones like Loop, for example, where the founder of Loop, Austin Allison, he felt like he was put on this earth with this mission to digitize real estate transactions. And he built a great company with a great culture at Loop, trying to digitize real estate transactions. And he firmly believed that by selling his company to Zillow, he would accelerate his goal, his mission of digitizing real estate transactions. So it would help him achieve his mission better than if he stayed independent. And when we acquired Loop, the whole team stayed, including him. He stayed for 4 or more years after the acquisition. So did almost all of the team, in order to try to complete the mission that they set out. That's inspiring. That's just an example of a founder that built a company for the right reasons and then chose to stay through the acquisition. It just so happens that Austin is my co-founder of Pacaso now, which, when he and I both left Zillow, we decided to try it again and create a mission-driven company that's trying to revolutionize second home ownership. Anyway, but with respect to M&A, yeah, the strategic fit of a target with the acquirer and team retention and team mission is very important.
Mhm. So why decide, like, you're named, I think in one magazine named you as like the most powerful person in residential real estate. So you're at the top of the real estate world at this point, and you decide, okay, hey, I'm stepping down and I'm leaving the board a couple years later. Well, why decide to do that?
I felt like I had accomplished everything I set out to accomplish at Zillow. I was there for about 15 years. We took it from an idea to a verb, and a household brand that most people have heard of and many people love. And it was time for new challenges. And I'm excited about this next chapter of trying to help startups go from that 0 to 1 stage. And hopefully I'll be lucky enough to be involved in the creation of a couple more companies that become iconic in the way that Zillow has become.
Yeah. So now with Pacaso, like, how is your approach different for making homeownership more accessible, second homeownership more accessible than like the traditional timeshare?
Pacaso takes luxury second homes and we fractionalize them. So we let people buy a portion, say an eighth or a quarter or 3/8 of a luxury second home. And then those owners own that home or co-own that home with other folks that they don't know. And they use the Pacaso app to schedule visits to the home. And Pacaso does the property management for the house. It's different from a timeshare in lots of ways. In fact, we don't even like using the word timeshare in the same, in the same breath as Pacaso. So the biggest difference, I think, is that you own real property in the case of Pacaso, meaning that you actually own a quarter of that house. Like, it is truly yours. If Pacaso were to go away, it doesn't matter. You own that house. If Marriott Vacation Club were to go away, were to fail as a company, the timeshare that you own there would be totally worthless. But secondly, we have liquidity in our marketplace, meaning that we've had, I think, 50 or more resales of Pacasos. We've only been around for 3 years. And they've appreciated 10 or 11% on average. So when you want to sell your Pacaso, there's actually a marketplace for it. Firstly, the other owners of that home can buy that unit in their own home, or it gets listed in the MLS and it appears on sites like Redfin and Realtor.com and many other real estate websites. So we've got liquidity. You have the home, and then I guess the last point is it is unique inventory. When you buy a timeshare, you're buying time in a high-rise building on the beach in Waikiki, and there are thousands of other like units, not just on the weeks of the year, but also the units in the building. In the case of Pacaso, it's an actual specific home in Malibu, in Tahoe, in Aspen, in Vail, in London, in Cabo, and it's actually a quarter of that exact house, and so it's very unique, and that's one of the reasons that the real estate tends to appreciate, and that it is real property.
So what are some of your like short-term goals for Pacaso and like and how to scale it?
Well, we have a long way to go with Pacaso. I mean, we started 3 years ago. You're getting me, I think, on our 3-year anniversary. We've already passed about $1 billion of revenue. We have 1,500 owners. We've had 90,000 stay nights, and we're in 40 markets in 4 countries. So I'm very, very proud of what we've accomplished in 3 years. Frankly, we're further along by most metrics than Zillow was after 3 years or Hotwire was after 3 years. So we're up to a very good start, a very fast start, but we have a long way to go. The mission of this company is to truly democratize second home ownership so that many hopefully someday tens of millions of people around the world will be able to own a second home, a vacation home, in a way that they couldn't previously. And we're still in a relatively small footprint, and we're still so far very focused on luxury homes. We haven't moved to the middle part of the market just yet, where I think there's huge opportunity. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're off to a very good start at Pacaso.
Mm-hmm. So why also focus on helping take some companies public, like you help with OfferPad and quantum computing company too? Like, why do that as well?
Yeah, well, so during the SPAC craze, I jumped in and I did 2 SPACs, as you point out. I mean, I had taken a couple companies public before as CEO or been on their board, and I saw a lot of issues with the traditional IPO process, and I was optimistic that SPACs would help fix some of those problems. And, unfortunately, the SPAC product is pretty broken right now, meaning that some of the benefits of going public via SPAC merger no longer apply. Notably, the speed with which a company can go public through a SPAC merger used to be a huge advantage, but now the SEC has kind of reduced that advantage by slowing the approval process of SPAC mergers. So, SPACs didn't work out the way really anybody expected or anybody thought they would. In the case of OfferPad and Rigetti, the 2 companies that my SPACs took public, I think those are both excellent companies. And, I think they're poised to change the world in their industries. That, in Rigetti's case, quantum computing, in OfferPad's case, the way that people sell homes. And I'm actually, they're fortunate that they went public via SPAC. This is one aspect of the postmortem of SPACs that most people haven't focused on, which is if companies like that hadn't gone public via SPAC, they'd probably be out of business now because they probably wouldn't be able to raise venture capital right now. So having gone public via SPAC provided them each with over 100 million of capital and got them on the track. And I think, if you ask both of those executive teams, they would tell you that they're very, very glad that they went public by merging with my SPACs. Even though it has admittedly been a rocky road once they've been public, it was actually really good that they went public via SPAC.
This is the last question that I have. What's it been like founding a company with your daughter, Sophia?
It's been great. I mean, I've started 6 companies in the last couple of years, and one of them is definitely a labor of love. My co-founder is my now 18-year-old daughter, Sophia. We started Recon Food together, and Recon Food is a social network for food. It's basically Instagram for food. And, I think what I learned most from that experience was something I always knew in my career, which was the importance of having diversity on the founding team. And in the case of Sophia and me, obviously we don't have certain types of diversity we don't have because we lived, at the time under the same roof, but we have huge age diversity. And so learning from a co-founder that's 30 years younger than I was invaluable, and understanding how young people view social media, interact with social media. No amount of user research could have ever replaced the benefits of having a co-founder 30 years younger than I. And so that was really a very formative and terrific experience for both of us.
Awesome. Look, Spencer, I appreciate you coming on. I think you've done some incredible things in the real estate space and continue to really innovate and find new ways to push the industry forward, whether, really any industry you're in. So thanks for taking the time. I'm always excited to see what you do next.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.